It all started with one moment on live television that detonated like a bomb no one could put back together again. One sentence, one opinion. And suddenly, everything exploded. Phones lit up, complaints poured in by the thousands, social media went feral. People weren't just angry, they were demanding blood, demanding jobs, demanding silence. And right at the center of that chaos stood
Either of those two people expressed negative concern about the skin colour of an unborn child.
Frankly contemptible. So if I have to fall on my sword for expressing an honestly held opinion, so be it.
Understand that you don't like Meghan Markle. You've made it so clear a number of times on this programme.
Piers Morgan refusing to back down. Piers Morgan said something on live TV that caused absolute chaos. We're talking thousands of complaints flooding in, people demanding he get fired, the internet losing its mind. But here's what nobody saw coming. Meghan Markle herself reached out behind the scenes personally trying to get him removed from his job. Not through PR teams, not through official channels, directly. And Piers didn't even know about it until after he'd already left. Think about that for a second. Someone who constantly preaches about being authentic was actively working to silence someone for simply not believing her story. But here's the wild part. He's still standing completely uncanceled. And what he's been holding on to this whole time is absolutely devastating because everything he questioned, every inconsistency he pointed out, every timeline that didn't add up, none of it's been explained to this day. And when someone goes that hard to silence critics instead of just showing them they're wrong, you've got to wonder what they're really hiding. What Piers uncovered isn't just one weird detail. It's a pattern so disturbing that even her most devoted supporters started asking questions they never thought they'd ask. Before we get into this, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because what's coming is going to blow your mind. Bump photos that literally don't make sense. That last line is where everything cracked open. Because once people started really looking, not glancing, not scrolling, but studying the images, the timelines, the movements, something didn't feel right anymore. This wasn't one bad angle. This wasn't one awkward photo. It was repetition, contrast, inconsistency stacked on inconsistency.
Real baby bump, or has she strapped it on? She's got form for strapping on baby bumps.
Timelines that completely fall apart and a silence that says everything. If you want to see how this all unravels, smash that like button right now. Let's dive in. People immediately began comparing, not out of cruelty, but out of curiosity. When Catherine had her children, she followed a tradition that's practically sacred in royal life. Hours after giving birth, she stepped outside the hospital doors, hair done, makeup flawless, standing tall in heels, holding her newborns up for the world to see. 3 times, no hiding, no mystery, no disappearing act. What followed with Meghan Markle couldn't have been more different. Her pregnancy unfolded like a shape-shifting puzzle. One day, she appeared carefully guarded, cradling her stomach, moving slowly, lowering herself into chairs with exaggerated care. The image screamed fragility. Then, just days later, new photos surfaced, and suddenly the picture changed. The bump looked smaller, or lower, or positioned differently. Her posture changed, her movement changed, and it wasn't gradual, it was abrupt.
I'll take it. And chairs. Nice to see chairs.
And she's flying up staircases in these crazy tall heels, like nothing's slowing her down. It's like 2 completely different situations. That contrast is what people couldn't shake. Yes, pregnancies vary, energy fluctuates, bodies behave differently, but this wasn't a slow evolution over months. These were drastic shifts happening within the same week, sometimes within days, ready to pop one moment, practically weightless the next. Screenshots began circulating. Side-by-side comparisons flooded forums. And when those images were aligned, when angles were removed from the excuse list, the confusion deepened instead of fading. People weren't mocking. They were asking one question over and over again, how? Then things turned stranger. Scheduling information allegedly started surfacing. Internal planning notes, Timetables, the kind of behind-the-scenes logistics no one was ever meant to see. And if those documents were accurate and no one has definitively disproven them, they didn't just raise eyebrows, they blew the whole timeline apart. Appointments supposedly scheduled for one place, while photos showed Meghan attending events across the city at the exact same time. Not close by. Not barely doable. Physically impossible overlaps. You can't be in two places at once, especially not when pregnancy appointments are involved. Then came the birth plan narrative. The public had been told repeatedly that Meghan intended to give birth at home at Frogmore Cottage. Private, natural, on her own terms. It fit the image perfectly. And then suddenly, without explanation, May 6th arrived and the baby was born at Portland Hospital instead. No clarification, no statement, no explanation. The entire home birth narrative vanished like it had never existed.
And secretive around labor and birth unless you're trying to shuffle out a surrogate.
People kind of expect at least a brief heads up when it does a complete 180 overnight, but that didn't happen. That silence changed everything. Because once one big story disappears without explanation, people start re-examining all the others. And that's when Piers Morgan went for the jugular. According to him, there were multiple versions of Archie's birth announcement prepared in advance. Different scripts, different details, ready to deploy depending on how events unfolded. Not preparation, production, not nerves, narrative control. And what followed was deafening silence. No denial, no clarification, no outrage, nothing. Then came the chaos around timing. No one was informed when labor began. The communications team wasn't notified until after the baby was already born. They scrambled to release a statement only for it to immediately contradict Meghan and Harry's version of events. One said hours earlier, the other implied something entirely different. It made the institution look incompetent by design. This wasn't accidental, this was control. From there, the Oprah interview took on a whole new weight. Meghan described isolation, abandonment, an institution that didn't care. Millions believed her, until alleged internal memos surfaced painting a radically different picture. Staff allegedly dropped everything to accommodate her requests, canceled plans, rearranged schedules, worked double shifts, immediate compliance, no delays, no pushback. And yet, meetings she was invited to attend, she declined them. Later, those same absences were framed publicly as exclusion. Doors weren't closed, they were open, she just didn't walk through them. That contradiction is what flipped the narrative for many people. Not hatred, not bullying, but disbelief. And then came the silence again. No response, no correction, no defense, not from her, not from Prince Harry, a man who built his entire post-royal identity on fighting false narratives. Nothing. In public opinion, silence like that doesn't read as dignity. It reads as avoidance. People went back and rewatched everything, especially Oprah. Pauses, tears that never fell, emotional peaks that landed exactly where they needed to. Piers lined up past interviews. Same cadence, same rhythm, same emotional choreography. To him, it wasn't raw, it was refined. And then he made his most explosive claim of all, that pregnancy itself had become a shield, a protective force field, a way to shut down scrutiny. Because questioning anything could be framed as cruelty. And culturally, that works, until patterns emerge. Once people saw the pattern, it lost its power. Questions didn't stop anymore. They multiplied. By the end, this wasn't about photos or schedules or announcements. It was about trust. And once trust collapses, it doesn't shatter loudly. It erodes quietly, permanently. Every future statement now gets dissected. Every interview analyzed. Every emotional moment questioned. Not because everyone believes the allegations, but because no one was given answers. And that's the real fallout. Not scandal, not outrage, but doubt that never leaves. Once credibility cracks this deeply, it never fully heals. And that was exactly the point. And that lingering doubt is the part nobody can undo now. Because once it settles in, it changes how every single word is heard going forward. Every pause becomes suspicious. Every emotional moment gets reinterpreted. Every carefully chosen sentence sounds less like truth and more like strategy. People stop listening with empathy and start listening with a calculator in their head, tallying contradictions instead of feelings. What's wild is how quietly that shift happened. There was no single explosion where everyone suddenly turned. It was more like a slow leak, a drip. One unanswered question here, one timeline mismatch there, one moment of silence where there should have been clarity. And over time, that drip hollowed everything out. Supporters who once defended every move without hesitation began softening their language. Instead of "this is all lies," it became, "well, maybe there's more context." Then why hasn't this been addressed? Then finally, the most dangerous question of all, why wouldn't they just explain it? Because here's the thing, if the story is solid, explanation strengthens it. Transparency protects it. Silence only helps when the truth complicates the narrative. And that's why the silence screamed louder than any accusation ever could. Meanwhile, critics didn't need to prove anything definitively. They didn't need a smoking gun. All they had to do was keep pointing at the gaps, keep replaying the clips, keep lining up the timelines, because unanswered questions have gravity. They pull attention toward them. And the longer they're ignored, the heavier they get. Harry's silence became its own story too. This was the man who once said he'd do anything to protect his wife from false narratives. The man who blamed the media for everything from mental health struggles to family breakdowns. And yet, when the most personal claims imaginable surfaced about his wife's pregnancy, about the birth of his child, he vanished. No outrage, no legal threats, no emotional defense. To a public trained by years of interviews to expect fury and confrontation, that absence felt unnatural. And when something feels unnatural, people start asking why. Rewatching old interviews through this new lens made everything feel different. Moments that once felt heartfelt now felt choreographed. Not necessarily fake, but practiced, polished, like someone who knew exactly where the emotional beats were supposed to land. That doesn't mean pain wasn't real, but it does raise the question of how much was spontaneous and how much was shaped. And once people start seeing technique, they can't unsee it. The magic breaks. The illusion fades. What once felt intimate suddenly feels performative. And that's a brutal shift for any public figure, especially one whose credibility rests so heavily on personal truth. The comparison with other royals only made it worse. Not because one way is better than the other, but because the contrast was so stark. Open versus closed. Consistent versus fluid. Explained versus unexplained. Tradition versus secrecy. And secrecy, fair or not, always invites suspicion. Instead of shutting down the rumors, the refusal to engage seemed to validate them in the eyes of skeptics. Not because silence equals guilt, but because silence removes the only thing that can stop speculation: facts. And that's the irony in all of this. The attempt to control the narrative so tightly may have ended up destroying control altogether. Because once people believe they're being managed, they stop trusting anything they're given. Now, every new interview is treated like a puzzle instead of a confession. While viewers aren't absorbing the message, they're scanning for inconsistencies, waiting for the next moment that doesn't quite line up with the last one. And when that happens often enough, even genuine moments get questioned. That's the damage that doesn't show up in headlines, it doesn't trend loudly, it just sits there quietly reshaping perception. And perception once altered is nearly impossible to reset. So whether every claim is true or not almost becomes irrelevant. The outcome is the same. Doubt has entered the room and it refuses to leave. And as long as questions remain unanswered, that doubt will keep growing, feeding on silence, filling in gaps with speculation, and hardening into something far more permanent than any single scandal ever could. Because in the end, trust isn't lost in one dramatic moment. It's lost when people feel like they're being told a story instead of the truth. And once that feeling takes hold, every future word has to fight uphill just to be believed. Just to be believed. Just to be believed. Just to be